Hello everybody, I am making this recording again because I screwed it up last time because I had Discord on in the background. So I'm going to do it differently now. We're just going to turn off Steam here. And now we're just going to start the video. So this is by Anti-Citizen X, blah 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 blah. I've watched this video before, other people have watched this video before. I'm Professor Bobbington. You may know me from some videos or some shit. So I wanted to address this video by Anti-Citizen X where, he says that philosophy is stagnant. I am a accredited philosopher. I have a bachelor's degree in the subject, so I felt it was, appropriate for me to respond to this video. Other people have done it. I want to put my 2 cents in, so let's play it and see where we go.
All the amazing knowledge coming your way.
Welcome to the foundations of medicine, says the professor. I hope you're all as excited as I am to explore the vast, wonderful world of healing.
At first, everything seems to progress
so
normally,
basically,
but
I'm
it's
just
not
going to
long
make this
before you
shorter
notice.
than it needs to be. So he's making an analogy like if philosophy was taught like medicine, it'd be ridiculous, right? So if you listen to him here, right, he just goes through and then...
It's an unsettling trend. Rather than just teach students about the modern understanding of the human body, the instructor seems to fixate on the strangest of topics. For weeks, you suffer through lecture after lecture on wholly discredited practices like bloodletting, trepanation, phrenology, and homeopathy. Eventually, about halfway through the semester, the professor seems to settle down with more sensible topics like cell biology and the germ theory of disease, but it doesn't last. Before you know it, you're suddenly delving right back into the medicinal theories of feng shui, acupuncture, and demon possession. Yeah. Baffled by this outcome, you begin to wonder,
so you get what he's basically doing, right? This is basically, he spends this whole part making the comparison between medicine and philosophy, and if philosophy were taught like medicine, it'd be ridiculous. And my response to this is basically now remember this is kind of, if I sound like I'm kind of going fast, it's because I already recorded me responding to this section, and then I realized I fucked up, and I had Discord on in the background and a bunch of other stuff that I did not want in the background. So we're not using that footage. So he's here he is oh my god, there's all this fucking bullshit is being taught to me and all that. And so the obvious problem with comparing philosophy to medicine or stuff like that is because philosophy is a humanities course for a reason. It's because it's not a hard science. It's not a hard science and can't be considered a hard science, so any attempt at making it sound like a hard science doesn't make any sense. So I still don't understand the weird comparison. And when you get further in this video, it sounds like he's, trying to... The comparison is just invalid. I don't understand why he does it.
To officially earn your medical credentials, you must endure such classes as medicine and literature, God, faith, and healing,
blah, blah, blah.
with
Yeah.
even a local phenomenon. It's a widespread, sensible that is, for anyone but a philosophy major. This may seem like a far-fetched scenario, but it really is how modern philosophy is taught at the college level. Generally speaking, philosophy courses do not really educate students in philosophy per se. Instead, most treatments on the subject are far better described as a history of philosophy, or perhaps a survey. Sure, it might be interesting information to some, but it is not exactly the condensed summary of modern consensus that tends to define other fields. Now, to be fair, this is not necessarily a bad thing. If a history of philosophy is really what interests you, well then by all means, go ahead and study it. There may even...
One of my things in my original footage that I responded to is that philosophers are not just people who have a knowledge of the history of a subject. They're people who are trained in critical thinking and actually problem solving. Analytic philosophers, for example, are huge most of them, a great many of them are mathematicians and philosophers of science. It never seems to cross this dude's mind that philosophers of science are a thing. But whatever.
Even be real tangible value in this stuff, and so there's nothing intrinsically wrong with exploring it for its own sake.
Yeah.
But can we please just take a moment to recognize what's really going on here? A formal education in philosophy will not actually qualify you as an authority in correct philosophical thought.
So this idea of correct philosophical thought, you already don't understand philosophy if you think there's a correct philosophical thought. again, this is why philosophy is a humanities major, not a science major, because the idea of correct philosophical thought is just like, is kind of absurd. How do you empirically prove that? Because here's the thing about philosophy. Once you start making a philosophy practical, when you put it into a practice, it just becomes something else entirely. Philosophy that involves, experimentation and creating theses and having that thesis proven or disproven, that eventually becomes like what we now today consider modern science. Similar with sociology and psychology, etc., etc. So, philosophy is more concerned with theory-based stuff. That doesn't mean that doesn't necessarily mean there is a correct philosophy, because philosophy is so broad. How do you determine a correct one?
At best, you will only emerge as a glorified historian and taxonomist. Much of this is intentional, too. There's an outspoken tradition in Western education that says it is always more important to teach students how to think rather than what to think. College philosophy, it seems, is just taking this doctrine to a fanatical extreme. The questions themselves are often considered more interesting than the actual answers, and the very act of thinking through arguments is widely regarded as a valuable end unto itself. Professors and textbooks alike will therefore spend plenty of effort on the comparative analysis of ideas, but rarely on the establishment of which ones are official orthodoxy. Take, for example, the classic writings of ancient...
Okay, so what did he cover right there again?
alike will therefore spend plentiful answers, and the very act of thinking through arguments...
Oh, yeah. So, my original response to this was... Here's the thing, you can be right and wrong. Yeah, your conclusion can be right, but your way of getting to that conclusion can still be wrong. That's how syllogism works. It's in order for your conclusion can be factually correct. I can't think of one right off the head. But you can have a conclusion that's empirically verifiably correct, but your theory can still be wrong. That's the goal of philosophy. Yeah, there really should be the goal of any educational institution. This isn't even a problem with philosophy he has. He has a problem with education. But he's saying it's to this fanatical extreme. Well, no, that's in any PhD program. The idea that you should understand how to think like a physicist, how to think like a sociologist, how to think like a theologian or a philosopher. That's the point. Literally, the P in PhD means philosophy.
Is widely regarded as a valuable end unto itself. Professors and textbooks alike will therefore spend plenty of effort on the comparative analysis of ideas, but rarely on the establishment of which ones are official orthodoxy.
This official orthodoxy thing, any philosophy department that says it has an official orthodoxy, you should run away from that department as fast as possible. Do not go to a philosophy department that says it has an orthodoxy. You basically just do not like philosophy if you believe that philosophy departments should have philosophy in general should have an orthodoxy. Because that go against the very nature of the subject.
Take, for example,
it's about questioning orthodoxy.
The classic writings of ancient Stoicism.
The classic writings of ancient self-help stuff.
Popular outlook on life that emphasizes self-control and mental fortitude as a path to happiness. Every undergraduate student of philosophy will eventually read about this stuff at some point, as well as the views of their contemporary rivals. If, however, you were to ask your professor whether or not Stoicism actually works, well, then you will almost certainly get a non-committal answer. To illustrate, should I adopt Stoicism for myself? Will Stoicism improve?
The professor is not a guru. That's not their job. Yeah, the point of a professor is for them to educate you and to show you how to do philosophy. The point is for you to come across an answer yourself. Well, you're complaining that professors don't just say, believe this, and then that's it. Like, no, any fucking philosophy professor that does that should be fired. Because they're not doing philosophy at that point.
Improve my life or make me more successful? Can Stoicism help me cope with trauma or overcome my bad habits? Are there any comparative studies evaluating this stuff empirically? Who the hell knows? Academic philosophy doesn't care about picking sides or quantifying efficacy.
And why should they? Like, that'd be a fucking terrible idea.
It only seeks to examine how other people have historically...
Can you imagine, in like a theology class, like they just started picking sides between, like, I don't know, Calvinism and Celtic Christianity or some shit? Can you imagine they started picking sides? Jesus Christ, no.
...viewed the world. Success in the modern philosophical context often has very little to do with ideas being practical or insightful. Rather, success is generally measured by the degree of influence they possess. It is therefore not even a question of whether Stoicism happens to be right or wrong. We study it because it was a hugely popular force that influenced multiple centuries of development in ancient Western culture. Again, there is nothing intrinsically wrong with this sort of methodology, provided that we honestly acknowledge it for what it is. In principle, you could be the world's greatest thinker who decisively settles all the big questions for all time, and every philosophy undergraduate would still be required to slog through a gigantic mountain of inferior content.
I love how it's just a collection of general shit you learn in, like, undergrad studies. Just a mishmash of stuff. So,
before ever touching your ideas. Like what?
So, the inferior content is what led to that supposed objectively good philosophy right there. Like, philosophy in the West is a direct line you can draw from, like, modern, like, you know, postmodernists, modern postmodernists, all the way back to friggin' Plato and Aristotle. In order to... This is like me saying that, like, you should be learning modern quantum physics before you learn even basic high school physics. No, you need to learn basic classical logic before you're even able to grasp some of the more advanced concepts, like, I don't know, Hegelian dialectics. There's no way you're going to be able to understand that without understanding, like, a bit of Aristotle. That's not going to happen.
You could write a 4,000...
Or like Kantian deontology. You're not going to understand that.
1,000-page ejaculation of incoherent word salad, and all you would have to do is impress the right people in order to have your...
Spoiler alert, he's going to bring up a bunch of statistics later. He's saying, like, impress the right people, but the only philosophers he can seem to really come up with, like, I don't see Daniel Dennett up here. I don't see Noam Chomsky. I don't see, like, Slavoj Žižek. I don't see other people, like, modern thinkers who are around today. It's just a bunch of, like, Christian apologists. Are these the only philosophers you can even bother to think of? And Thomas Aquinas. You know, like, it's... You know, theology might be something I want to read. I can't judge this book. I can't say whether or not he's right or wrong because I have not read this book, but I very much do intend to read it someday. I probably should. He's saying, like, impress the right people, but in, like, he contradicts this later by bringing up statistics that show, like, the majority of philosophers are, like, atheists. So, you know, influence, really?
Ideas taught alongside more sensible content. All of this would be perfectly tolerable, or even admirable, if not for one thing. Philosophers, in both professional and amateur circles alike, seem to be endowed with an overly optimistic sense of self-importance. University departments from across the world brag openly about how philosophy teaches students such important skills as critical thinking, logical analysis, and complex problem solving. They take pride in their supposedly
and analytical philosophers, you know, they are very good at problem solving. A lot of them are mathematicians.
Passionate use of pure reason to create and evaluate arguments, all for the sake of developing a clear and systematic view of who we are, where we stand, and where we should be going. It all sounds wonderful in principle, but it's also a complete fiction. To demonstrate, imagine a professional
this is
community
great.
of thousands of dedicated intellectuals who
Okay.
are all highly trained experts in the art of truth-finding. Now imagine these same intellectuals all share a common goal of exploring difficult questions, collecting evidence, evaluating arguments, and deriving the most sensible conclusions possible. Naturally, we should expect such a group to eventually reach a unanimous consensus on every question posed, given that they all share the same methods, the same goals, the same evidence, and the same arguments. If anything, the very existence of any disagreement whatsoever would only prove
Wait till he gets to his statistics.
that certain members of that community are either not following the correct guidelines, not sharing the same evidence, or not being sincere in their supposed...
As if, like, I'm just imagining in my mind, just one guy says God exists, and, like, the whole, like, a whole department of, like, PhDs and professors is just so fucking daft to just say, no, it doesn't. Jesus Christ, no. Just stop, dude. Just stop, man. It's embarrassing. As if, I don't know what to say. Philosophers would never act like that. And again, I don't know how much in my department, nobody is sitting here talking about how great fucking William Lane Craig is. I bet if I sat down and asked them, was like, hey, what do you think of William Lane Craig? Some of them probably wouldn't even know what he is or who he is.
supposed quest for truth.
Unless they specialize in philosophy of religion, in which case maybe they do.
The more disagreement there is, in fact, the more evident it would be that such a group is neglecting to enforce consistent standards of honest inquiry.
Okay, so like on the frontiers of like science and like quantum physics or like dark matter, there's a whole ton of disagreement. How does disagreement equal worse standards? How? By what metric have you arrived at that?
Now imagine that very same group, utterly failing to converge on a single point of agreeable fact, have something that closely were surveyed on a variety
of... here's his little survey that it brings up. What do philosophers believe? Dave Bourget and David Chalmers. Abstract of he surveyed for in order to determine their views on 30 articles. This is basically a giant... What this isn't really like... It's basically a survey. It's a survey as to the personal opinions of a bunch of philosophy PhDs as well as undergraduates. This isn't really like a survey or like a research paper on the findings of philosophers. So I don't know how it counts.
Of foundational topics. You would think that if philosophers really are the great experts in reason that they claim to be, then we should expect an overwhelming consensus on the major questions of their field. The results, however, were the exact opposite. Not a single question could garner any consensus above 90%, and only one question was able...
Okay, so philosophy is about like having dialogues and discussions. It's not like science where you just empirically prove something. That's not... And in order for, like, let's say, like, modern natural science to work, you need everybody to be on the same page when it comes to a theory. Otherwise, the experiments don't work. So there is huge practical reason why a theory is, like, heavily tested and justified. And also, but, like, philosophy, there really isn't such thing. But there are, again, when you start putting a philosophy into praxis, it becomes something else. It becomes something other than just philosophy. It's like philosophy of X. But whatever.
Able to break above 80%. We're not even talking about weird esoteric issues either, but fundamentally basic questions to all of philosophy.
But some of these are majorities, as he is throwing. Like, oh yeah, here you go. Yeah, like even in his own, William Lane Craig's influence, huh? God, theism or atheism? Atheism, 72.8%, plus or minus 1.77%. There's his freaking... There is your consensus. You're never going to get, you are going to have, some dissenting voices in a philosophical discussion. It's going to happen. And I bet amongst this other, there's probably a couple of polytheists in there, too, because it's not just atheism or theism. I guess theism includes polytheism, maybe, but, I guess depending on how they... defined their terms. But whatever, let's keep going.
Itself. For example, what is truth? What is knowledge? What is logic? Do we have...
These are questions that you can't answer simply with some sort of empirical evidence. What is knowledge is completely, like, within the bounds of rationality. So how do you answer that question exactly? Do we have free will? I mean, again, 60% pretty much are like, yeah, I'm a compatibilist.
Have free will? Is there such a thing as...
56% are moral realists, 30% are anti-realists, and 15% are probably some mix of the two.
Good and evil. It cannot be overstated that in most any other professional field of study, this would be an absolute...
I genuinely don't care what scientists think, because, like, a bunch of scientists looking upon philosophy and just saying, like, you guys can't figure anything out, like, it just demonstrates the same level of ignorance that you do. It's not about just coming up with easy-to-access answers to questions. It's about... I mean, there are answers and there are new ways of explaining or attempting to answer a question. But that does not mean the question is then, like, done, solved. Again, philosophy doesn't work that way.
Embarrassing.
I don't know, maybe I'm talking over too much. I'll let him go.
Yet, when it comes to academic philosophy, this is apparently
going on
just...
and on and about with his friggin' points. Here he is. Is there an external world? I mean, this sounds like a pretty big correspondence, a pretty big, like, agreement to me. 81.6%.
But they still cannot even fully commit to the existence of an objective reality beyond our sense perception. Even more embarrassing for the philosophical community is how many of the traditionally deep philosophical questions have already been long solved by professionals in other fields. Take, for example, the nature of morality and ethical behavior. Biologists and economists collectively solved this problem decades ago in that they both arrived at the same basic description via independent lines of investigation. Self-interest, when coupled with social interdependence and scarcity, naturally gives rise to cooperative pro-social behaviors. This is not a matter of any serious debate either, but a well-established field, complete with its own mathematical formalism.
Right, game theory. So, like, explaining where morality comes from is not the same thing as answering deep moral questions. You know, if it is always wrong to lie, then it is wrong. Then is it wrong to, like, lie to two, like, SS guards coming to arrest your Jewish neighbor that's hiding in the fucking sink or something, under the sink or something? You know, morality is a complicated issue that really can vary greatly depending on whatever subjective perspective you take it from. That doesn't say, like, you know, there is no objective morality at all. I think there definitely is, or at the very least, it's very easy to say, you know, what is definitely wrong to do. It's a different thing to say what is right to do. But I could get on that on a different video. But, like, you know, if someone asks you, is like, hey, what's the right thing for me to do in X situation? It doesn't answer that question at all to say, well, you know, theorists suggest in game theory that, you know, a lack of resources and social interdependence naturally create cooperative behavior. But sometimes they groups will kill each other. Or, you know, this doesn't answer anything. This answers nothing. I feel like a lot of, like, scientifically minded people kind of confuse the questions about morality with discerning the origin of morality. You know, I feel like fuck, damn it, no. Okay, we got it working again. Okay, good, it's working. I accidentally poked something on my mouse and it exited out of the video.
This is not a matter of any serious debate either, but a well-established field, complete with its own mathematical formalism, laboratory experiments, and real-world applications.
Yeah, whatever.
Yet, to this very day, we still find philosophy...
Again, like, totally not, like, again, like, total huge disagreement. The vast majority are like, hit the switch on the trolley, stop the trolley from killing people.
Who obsess endlessly about whether or not pulling the lever is murder.
Well,
This is exactly why academic philosophy has a less than stellar reputation among professional scientists, engineers, and the
I genuinely don't care what fucking scientists think, for the most part, unless they are actually trying to engage in philosophy themselves.
public at large. One of the most famous examples of this frustration was even voiced by Professor Stephen Hawking himself when he publicly declared that philosophy is dead. Mind you, he wasn't saying that philosophy is a completely pointless thing to study. Rather, he was complaining about the inability of philosophers to make progress and keep up with the times. Cosmologists are out there making amazing discoveries every day about the fundamental nature of space, time, and even causality itself. Yet philosophers are still...
And there's philosophers of science who are discussing that and the implications of those findings as well. Philosophers of science, most likely like Daniel Dennett, who are very much discussing those findings. But you didn't bother to look that up.
Still debating such banal questions as, what is the nature of being? They're not solving any new problems.
This is not a banal question. Are you serious? We're talking about, like, literally the nature of, like, being a human being. Or being itself. Which is almost hard to put into words at times.
Problems. They're just rehashing the same meaningless rhetoric for decade after decade. Countless...
It's not rehashing the same meaningless rhetoric, and if you bother to read a single ounce of fucking philosophy, you would know that.
Philosophers have shrieked at the idea that their beloved profession might be dead, but the sheer childishness of their rebuttals only proves the point further. They'll say such vapid things as, well, science is philosophical.
Science is a philosophy. Everything has a philosophy to it. There is a philosophy of sports, a philosophy of basketball. There's again, like I have mentioned multiple times, philosophers of science. Science is absolutely an applied philosophy. And Hawking was lambasted by philosophers for not keeping up with modern philosophy, ironically enough.
Or that Hawking himself holds to questionable philosophical views, or that the claim itself is just ill-informed, incoherent, and irresponsible.
Yeah, basically.
It's like a giant stream of insults, strawmen, and red herrings that make no effort to understand.
I bet you would never bother reading any of those criticisms. I bet if I go back, and let me read this. In the grand design, Stephen Hawking and fellow physicist Leonard Mlodinow declared on the first page that philosophy is dead because it has not kept up with modern developments in science. Then they proceed to make a series of philosophical pronouncements. Yes, I do remember reading that. It was actually funny. There is no picture or theory-independent concept of reality. A model is a good model of it. Is elegant. A model is a good model if it is elegant, contains few arbitrary or adjustable elements, agrees with and explains all existing observations, makes detailed predictions about future observations that can disprove or falsify the mode if they are not borne out. It was so funny for, like, after reading that quote, I would read, like, Hawking speculate as to whether or not a goldfish's view of reality inside a fishbowl could even be considered a false reality, and his answer was no. He's engaging in phenomenology. He's engaging in understanding the ontology of a goldfish. So it's just it is problematic, and it was problematic for Stephen Hawking to have said that. Because it's just like as this guy says here, and those who disparage philosophy are usually slaves of some defunct philosopher.
Or that the claim itself is just...
Let's read this one. Become the bearers of the torch of discovery. The philosopher, rather than scientists, argued their case in debate held at the British Academy in London last week, according to Tim Grain. Knightbridge professor of philosophy at the University of Cambridge himself proved that philosophy is unavoidable, since he put forward, that's what he did in the book. It was actually funny. Just watch him do philosophy right afterward. They all saw the same thing I did. Greg Raddick, professor of history and philosophy of science at University of Leeds, put the case for cross-fertilization between science and philosophy. Three of the most powerful scientific thinkers, Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, and Noam Chomsky, were also notably philosophically literate. He said lesser scientists could easily become too dogmatic as their teachers shut down access to foundational questions. If you are pro-reason, you need all the resources you can get. Philosophy journeys such as Hawking's ill-informed, incoherent, and irresponsible. Yeah, it's kind of silly.
Ill-informed,
it's really silly,
incoherent, and irresponsible. It's like a giant stream of insults, straw men, and red hair.
It's not a straw man. No, those were not everything but straw men. They deliberately criticized the thing that he did in his own book.
That make no effort to understand, let alone address, the underlying problem. Philosophy, as a professional academic institution, does not make progress.
Yes, it does. It absolutely does. And you showed it a few minutes ago. What?
It solves no problems and it makes no discoveries. Even the very word itself, philosophy, is a terribly ill-defined concept. To demonstrate, just ask yourself right now, what is philosophy? That is to say, when I go out and take a bunch of philosophy courses from the philosophy department to earn my philosophy degree, what exactly am I studying? What knowledge or skills must I acquire in order to officially qualify as an expert?
Well, at a basic level, understanding of logical fallacies, understanding syllogisms, being able to do logic tables and stuff like that. Obviously, a basic understanding of a broad array of different philosophies in general, like Asian philosophy, feminist philosophy, social justice philosophy. Of course, lots of different continental philosophy. Of course, you got David Hume, Marcus Aurelius, fucking Descartes. All these other types of philosophy, mind you.
In the field. What separates the study of philosophy from, say, the study of physics or art? How do we differentiate between a philosophical problem and a scientific one?
When we go to conceive of what, let's say, a great philosophical problem is when does life begin? Does it begin at conception, like conservatives say it does, or does it begin, at childbirth, like many pro-choice people say it does? Not to say you can't technically be conservative and pro-choice, but whatever, when does life begin? And that is a question that relates to semantics as well as philosophy, as well as we concern the nature of life. That is absolutely a philosophical problem. And resorting to science and a scientific definition of life is really problematic for reasons I could explain in a later video.
We measure the difference between good philosophy and bad philosophy. You would think that academic philosophy...
Good philosophy is something like Cicero outlining the different, the nature of the gods or something. Bad philosophy is this video.
Philosophers might be able to agree on this stuff at least, but even this is a hotly debated issue. For instance, consider the classic platitude that philosophy is simply the love of wisdom. By that definition, who isn't a philosopher? Who among us honestly hates wisdom and has no interest in understanding the world? At least one university...
Politicians, lawyers, Twitch streamers, the guy who made this video. Basically anybody who needs to who is more interested in rhetoric than they are in truth. Yeah. Those people do not love wisdom.
The department attempts to clarify this doctrine by telling us that philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves, the world in which they live, and their relationships to the world and to each other. Okay, so if I go out and get a PhD in philosophy, does that really make me an expert in the fundamental truths about myself, the world, and our relationships?
Maybe, probably. If you spend enough time dialoguing with people. I don't know. Whether or not you find the truth is really subjective.
If so, then why exactly does the community have such a hard time agreeing on what those truths are? Why?
Because it's not a science?
Why are they so terrible at rooting out the many falsehoods within their literature and just telling us the facts? In practice, a far more appropriate definition for a philosopher is someone who merely studies philosophy. Philosophy, then, is defined by the agreed-upon curriculum that all students are required to learn for their philosophy majors. It's a perfectly valid definition, and at least some university departments do seem to implicitly assume as much on their very own websites. But let's just be honest with ourselves about what this entails. Philosophy, for all practical purposes, is nothing more than a collection of arbitrarily assigned coursework defined by the undergraduate committee of your particular institution.
How is this... That... Okay, it's not. But I could literally say that about any discipline, ever. Like, every discipline is a collection of it could be defined as a collection of arbitrarily assigned courses defined by the undergraduate committee of your particular institution. Every institution has a... Okay. This is fucking dumb. I don't know what to... And it's not arbitrarily assigned. It's actually quite particular.
In practice, that usually amounts to a massive survey of thought from culturally influential figures throughout history. So
it involves, like, you have just proven to everyone watching this that you have taken, like, 2 intro courses in philosophy, and that's, like, it. It is much more than just reading and learning about a bunch of influential figures. It is about discussion, rooting out fallacies in the way of your thinking, sharing a dialogue with people, trying to understand the world from their perspective, and being able to communicate your perspective and communicate your ideas more frequently. Learning how to problematize a question, like a loaded question somebody asks you. That's philosophy.
Next time I need help contrasting the epistemological views of Immanuel Kant versus David Hume, well then I'll be sure to consult a philosopher. But when it comes to determining which views are more valid, functional, or practical, then I'm afraid even the
Valid is easy. Valid is just like, it needs to be... It can't have, like, internal contradictions. That's not hard.
Professional philosophers are just as unqualified as the rest of us. Again,
No,
all of
not.
this would be perfectly
Fuck you.
fine and dandy if not for the arrogant pretense that modern academic philosophers are the great lords of all human wisdom. They would like you to think that they're all out there
Says who? Who says this? Who?
probing the deepest mysteries of life, the universe, and everything, but that image is nothing but a pretentious fiction. Every month, this community publishes huge volumes of literature in prestigious academic journals, despite having no official consensus as to what a correct answer would actually look like, even if they ever found one. This is not a good thing.
Oh,
Hucksters, snake oil salesmen, and the outright incompetent are the only people who can possibly benefit from this kind of ambiguity. When a professional...
Oh my god. Yeah, so the reason why these aren't taken seriously, like these statements, I know the statements he's pulling out. The reason why these statements are not taken seriously anymore is because philosophy makes progress. Nobody who's reading Aristotle just, unequivocally swallows everything that his freaking books communicate. The same thing with Thomas Aquinas. Is really the only major philosophers you can come up with is a couple of Stoicists, Aristotle, and Thomas Aquinas. For somebody who claims to know a lot about philosophy, you certainly don't know anything about philosophy past, like, the 1700s.
field lacks any clear criteria over what constitutes sensible work, then the inevitable result is going to be a lot of worthless nonsense. So even if philosophy were to occasionally offer some worthwhile nuggets of truth, it is almost impossible to find any of that truth without first digging through a gigantic mountain of useless rhetorical bullshit.
Okay, I tried to be nice in the beginning of this video, but this is like utter horseshit. There's no way you have read enough philosophy books to be making this fucking statement. Go fuck yourself. You don't know what
Case
you're
in
talking
point,
about.
consider the famous philosopher Alvin Plantinga, who is widely regarded
Except like in his own statistics, like 72. I know who he's referencing. Alvin Plantinga is like a Christian apologist. Again, in his own statistics, like they say, like 72% of philosophers are fucking atheists. So again, widely regarded as deeply inspirational and wise. Except like most philosophers don't even agree with him on his own God belief.
Regarded as one of the greatest living philosophers of religion today. Yet,
oh, well, maybe. I don't know.
If you actually bother to read any of his writings, they're practically overflowing with some of the most asinine gibberish you'll ever encounter. The guy honestly wrote a 90-page essay in defense of the proposition that it is entirely right, rational, reasonable, and proper to believe in God without any evidence or argument at all. Not just any God, mind you, but specifically the Christian God of the Holy Bible. He even goes on to claim in his other writings that if you don't share his assessment about God's obviousness, well then sin must be corrupting your brain and literally making you stupid. As if all those...
Again, I never hear about this guy in my department. I've heard about him on like YouTube. When I look up like philosophy or religion stuff, he's definitely there. But like, again, your own statistics prove that he is actually not that influential.
Those Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, pagans, and Jews across the entire world could only believe what they do out of idolatry, pride, and masturbation. These are not just some idle scribblings either, but widely considered to be Plantinga's magnum opus. You would think that this sort of grossly bigoted incompetence would earn someone the disdain of an entire community of expert critical thinkers, but no. Instead, the guy has practically been showered with awards, fellowships, and honors. Bear in mind now that Professor Hawking and myself are far from the only people to notice these problems with philosophy. And many prominent...
Yeah, no. You and Professor Hawking are unfortunately not the only people to bring up these like really uninformed criticisms of philosophy. Trust me, there's criticism you can make of academic philosophy. The idea that it makes no progress is not one of them.
Figures have written extensively about it in recent years. So it's not really a question of if philosophy has a problem, but how best to explore that problem and bring the field back to some semblance of respectability. It's ironic, too, because the philosophers themselves are apparently the last people on Earth we can count on for that kind of resolution. Philosophy, after all, is just a word, which means there is no objectively correct way to define it and protect it. Any answer we give is necessarily going to be arbitrary, and there are dozens of competing schools of thought over how best to define the subject. Let's not forget that countless members of the community also have a vested interest in maintaining this lack of standards, as it allows them to own philosophy. It's interesting when you utter this phrase out loud, because it actually provides a subtle clue as to what the word philosophy tends to indicate in practice, namely, the rigorous articulation of what stuff means.
No, it's fucking not. I've explained multiple times what philosophy actually involves, so I'm not even going to waste my time.
Well, it sounds trivial when you put it in those terms, but if you know anything at all about modern philosophy, then you know that this is a ubiquitous feature of the profession. Not just mere dictionary definitions, mind you, but a relentless drive towards conceptual clarity. To demonstrate, consider the so-called philosophy of science. In order to officially call yourself a scientist, then presumably you accept the fundamental goals of science and you agree to practice its methods.
Again, everybody except Daniel Dennett up there.
Science is not just a body of knowledge per se, nor is it a system of doctrines to be affirmed. Science is a process to be followed. A philosophy of science may thus be defined as any description of what science is, why science matters, how science operates, and how to identify those who fail to do science correctly. It doesn't have to be set in stone either, in that anyone and everyone is more than welcome to offer their own particular spin on the basic principles. It is tempting to complain that all of this may only be a mere philosophy unto itself, but at least it's a consistent philosophy that...
What? What are you talking about? I can't figure out what he's doing.
That reasonably captures what people usually mean whenever they use the word. For example, the philosophy of education, philosophy of religion, philosophy of law, moral philosophy, art, language, sports,
All that shit I was talking about earlier that you wanted to...
politics. Heck, even corporations have their own philosophies. It therefore stands to reason that the philosophy of philosophy, or simply metaphilosophy, should likewise explain what it is that philosophers do, why they do it, what value it brings.
I mean, you could easily go look up the meta-philosophy and broadly see it divided into two camps of analytic and continental philosophy, but that would require you reading philosophers other than Christian apologists.
And how to tell the difference between competent or incompetent practitioners. So how exactly do you think that the community of professional, PhD-level philosophers officially define their field? Simple. They don't. They honestly and truly do not know what it means to be a philosopher.
Our embarrassment of the question of what we may also reflect on the fact to put this as back provocatively. It itself is one of the fundamental questions of philosophy. Yeah, it's philosophy is pretty easy to define. I've been defining it this whole time. Philosophy is concerned with questions of being, questions of the essential nature of things outside of just, which science is concerned with, like, the physical nature of things. Whereas philosophy is concerned with, like, metaphysics, logic, ethics, metaethics, ontology. Philosophy is concerned about critically examining things at their fundamental level.
Despite decades of
describing them.
Personal commitment to that very profession. It's weird, too, because it's not exactly that difficult to just observe a group of professionals at work and then enumerate the various tasks they collectively tend to engage in.
I love this one.
The way I see it, most professional philosophers in the academic world are essentially just a bunch of cultural curators. Human beings have been debating the same foundational questions.
So, no, they're not. When René Descartes was, creating the Cartesian plane, he wasn't just doing cultural curation. He has Descartes up there. Descartes is one of the most influential mathematicians in Western history. So you realize he did a lot more than cultural curation, right? Same goes for Karl Popper up there, who was a scientist. And you also have the same for, again, Noam Chomsky, who is referenced in one of the articles he's reading, was a linguist. Albert Einstein was philosophically literate, as was also mentioned in one of the articles you had up there. So there are philosophers who have a practical application of their philosophy. You just ignore it.
Throughout history, and there is real value in cataloging the variety of answers which develop over time. In this context, it simply doesn't matter if the community is unable to
break to get some water. We will now start with the video.
A correct philosophical stance is utterly meaningless. At best, we can only explore the perspectives of influential figures, articulate their claims more succinctly, summarize the various critiques, and then enable students to figure out which answers work best for themselves.
Sounds like philosophy to me.
If we like,
that's kind of what the point is.
We may further identify an applied category of philosophy, which is
again, I've been talking about applied philosophy ad nauseum since the beginning of this video.
Defined by the act of doing philosophy or merely philosophizing. Anyone can do it, and it's simply a matter of doing exactly what we just established. A formal articulation of definitions, goals, values, presuppositions, beliefs, whatever, followed by a thorough exploration of supporting arguments,
in a rigorous articulation of what stuff means. Get the fuck out of here. No, philosophy concerns a lot bigger, the nature of logic itself, the nature of being, the nature of what a thing is. And the reason I'm being so vague is because it's so broad, it does become notoriously hard to define, but we do have an idea of what it is.
Logical
and it's not this.
Implications and practical consequences. Successful practitioners are thus measured by their overall degree of cultural influence, but I believe that we can also reasonably evaluate their merits by examining certain objective criteria. For instance, I personally think that good philosophers must clearly define their terms, rigorously formulate their...
That's like what you do in Logic 101, dude. Oh, practical relevance. Yeah, I mean, you could do that.
Arguments in accordance with established rules of inference, and then show how such conclusions are relevant to real-world
This is philosophy. This is... Okay.
problems. In other words, what do you mean by that? How do you know that? And why should anyone care? Qualified philosophy from an experienced professional within science and engineering. Again, this may only be my personal philosophy, but
I don't know what the hell he's talking about when he says, like, the counter-argument would be it's his personal philosophy. What? Who would make this counter-argument?
at least it's a qualified philosophy from an experienced professional within science and engineering. Just because goals and definitions are arbitrary, that does not mean anyone is free to concoct whatever self-serving nonsense they like.
Like in philosophy.
If you expect your ideas to be clear, informative, and compelling, then there are just certain rules you're going to have to learn to follow.
Which they do.
If, however, you don't care about any of those things, well then by all means, go ahead and mash your keyboard with whatever vapid gibberish comes to mind. Just don't act surprised when the rest of the world tends to have a hard time adopting your conclusions. But who knows? Maybe I'm being overly simplistic.
Yes, you are. Yeah, this is absolutely an overly simplistic analysis of like academic philosophy. This is probably one of those like ignorant ass videos I've seen in a long time. I love how most of the time when it came to actually naming off of some philosophers, all you could really do is essentially show like Alvin Plantinga and like William Lane Craig and Thomas Aquinas. You clearly haven't heard of Noam Chomsky. You clearly haven't heard of Slavoj Žižek. You tried to imply that influence was pretty much the main criteria for philosophy. It's really not. It's the dialogue itself and whether or not philosophers actually do finish the dialogue. And you clearly didn't bother to read those, huge philosophy papers you keep citing in this video. You didn't even read, you obviously didn't read the articles criticizing Hawking that you cited in this video because they don't strawman him. You claim they do. They don't. They accurately criticize the thing I read in that book when I still had it. Hawking himself engages in philosophy, which I find deeply ironic after he said it was dead. Anyway, yeah, so this video is... it's one of the... Me reacting to this video is something I wanted to do for a long time. I hope I pretty much got my point through. Subscribe, like... type your opinion in the comments section. And yeah, thank you very much.